welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going over all of the books that I read in the month of June. So I had a really good reading month in June. I read 11 books and that is awesome for me. I listened to most of them on audiobook because, like I've explained before, I usually have a ton of time to listen to audiobooks. So number one, I listen to them with headphones as I'm rocking my baby to sleep at night when he goes to bed, and then also in the middle of the night when he wakes up. So that takes up quite a bit of time, and also for his naps. So I listen to them with that, and then also I live an hour away from our nearest city, so whenever I'm taking the kids to go do something, or whenever I'm going to the city for a grocery run, anything like that, I always listen to an audiobook then, which I usually listen to it on like 1.7 speed, so you know, an hour each way. I get through quite a bit of a book at that time. And then also I go for walks quite a bit too with my kids, and my kids and my dog, of course. So we go for walks, and I sometimes will listen to audiobooks then. And yeah, so I have a ton of time to listen to audiobooks, so I get through most of them that way. But I did a few physical reads as well this month. And the first book that I finished, which is one that I have been waiting to read for a while now, that is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. Now this one, I was a little bit disappointed with. I did rate it a 3. But considering how excited I was for this one, like I saved this one. I wanted to read it all throughout the winter, but I saved it for the summertime because I really wanted to, you know, get the feeling of, you know, reading it in the cabin. I wanted to actually read it at our cabin, but I didn't. I just ended up reading it at home, and I was a little bit disappointed. This was not at all what I was expecting. So basically it is about a family. There is the 2 dads and the young daughter, and they are basically staying at an Airbnb at a cabin in the woods. They're there's no cell phone service or anything like that. They're trying to just like unplug for the weekend and reconnect as a family and just have a good time. While they are there, these 4 people, 2 men and 2 women, end up showing up at this cabin and demand to be let in. And basically they are trying to convince the family that is staying there that they have to let them in order to save the world. That's not what's written on the synopsis. Basically, the synopsis just says that these people show up and, you know, demand to be let in, sort of thing. So I'm thinking this is going to be like The Purge or something like that. Like this family's going to have to like fight for their lives, and these are crazy people coming to murder them. So I'm thinking it's going to be something like this, but basically, yeah, it ends up being about saving the world. It's just not at all what I expected it to be. It was okay, but I wouldn't necessarily call it horror or thriller, which is what this book is classified as. I mean, I guess there are some gory scenes and like some scenes that would be scary to some people, I suppose, but it's definitely not what it's marketed to be, if that makes sense. So the next book that I finished was House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, and I read this for my vlog where I was reading books like Books and Lala, and I really enjoyed this one. This one was really, really weird, I will say that, and it definitely, this is quite a thick book. It's like over 700 pages. And it seems a little daunting at first because the book is written in such a way, basically, well, I guess basically I'll tell you what it's about first and then kind of go into how it's written. What is this book even about? So it's about a couple of different things, okay? So we have different perspectives. So the perspective that we are reading from is from this like 20-something-year-old man. And he has come across this, I want to call it kind of like a diary, but basically of this old man that he knew through a friend of a friend, we'll just say that. He comes across this diary, but really it's this man was writing a book, and he was writing a book about the Navidson Record. And the Navidson Record are these series of home movies that were shot in the 90s. And it's kind of gained an occult following. So these movies, like I said, were shot in the 90s. They are home movies, but people aren't sure if this was a real event that took place, or if this was some sort of hoax, or somehow like Hollywood directed, even though it wasn't. Like kind of like, what was that movie with the witch in the woods? You know, like with the camcorder. Kind of like that. so people just aren't sure, and there's been like tons of, online sleuths trying to figure this out, and like I said, there's become a cult following about these home movies, and this man was writing a book about this. So he is writing and trying to explain things. There's all these footnotes and whatever, and we are reading, we're reading the perspective of our main character. We're reading about what's going on in his life as he's kind of having a descent into madness while he's reading this book. The book is unfinished, and our main character is kind of taken on the task of finishing the book. But so he's reading it, and we're reading what he's reading. So we are reading all about this Davidson record, all about these home movies. We're getting this all described to us. And in this movie, basically a family moves into this home, and this home will have random like open spaces happen out of nowhere. So all of a sudden one day they just like walk into their master bedroom, and there's a closet that wasn't there before. And then that closet ends up going missing, and then there's another like area that opens up, and basically there's this one area that opens up and they go into it, and it's massive. The house is like way bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. They can't figure it out. They are using all these like different kind of tools and trying to bring in some experts and trying to figure out what's happening with this house. But they go on this exploration, and like some people get lost in this room, because like when I say it's massive, I say it goes down like 500 feet down, and it's like caverns, like huge caves, and it's just like, it's very easy to get lost. There's like mazes going every which way, and it's just never ending, basically. It's never ending, and the space is constantly changing. So of course this sounds really cool, right? But the book is written in such a way that it's very hard to get through, and it's kind of almost like it mimics the maze-like quality that this house is exuding. And so when you're reading, you have to kind of try to figure out what to pay attention to. There's different things that happen. There's a million different footnotes, first of all. So you're reading your story, and then all of a sudden there'll be these footnotes that you have to read, that some of them have nothing to do with the story. It'll be like really dry information, like definitions, or like side stories that will kind of carry on for a couple. The footnote will be like a couple of pages, so you're constantly having to flip back and forth. And then there'll be like some pages of text that are really, really dense, and there's not a lot of reprieve, where you're just like, oh my god, like you feel trapped. And that's kind of like mimicking what's going on in the story, I noticed. And then there's some pages, like there was a period of about 50 pages where there was like one word on each page, and you're just flipping through, and you get through 50 pages in like 1 second. And I kind of just started to notice that in the book, when things were getting really like complicated and kind of like, when they're feeling trapped or they can't find their way out, that's when you kind of notice that the writing style is taking on the same sort of feeling that the book is having, where you're like, the writing style has no reprieve. And then when all of a sudden they get into this big cavern, and they're just like all this space and everything, that's when, the 50 pages happen. And it's just really, really cool how it was written. But there was also, like, they say that this book has some sort of like hidden meanings in it, or there's like a code that you can kind of figure out and crack. There's lots of random words that are capitalized, or different colors, or some words are upside down. Sometimes you have to turn the page upside down or read it in a mirror. Like, it's just really cool. It was really written in a really cool way. But in the beginning, I think I was a couple hundred pages in, or maybe 100 pages in, and I was like, what is this? Like, this book makes no sense. And I wasn't really into it to begin with, and I thought it was going to be another Books and Lala book that I just didn't like. But once I like really stuck with it, and I started to actually really like it, and you kind of get the hang of how to read it, and you kind of, like I said, you have to decide on what you're going to focus on, because if you allow yourself to get sidetracked by all this other stuff and all the footnotes that don't really add anything to the story, then you might have a different experience. You might not like the book as much. But that being said, maybe within doing that, you can figure out some of the hidden stuff that supposedly is in the book. I'm not sure. I just kind of decided that I was going to focus on the main story and kind of gloss over the things that didn't really add to it, or that was placed there, in my opinion, to confuse you. And then I got through it a lot quicker. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5. It was really, really cool. Definitely recommend it to anyone, just for the fact that it was like really different. It wasn't even the story that was like that great. It's just the experience of reading the book in itself that I really enjoyed. The next book that I read is House by Frank E. Peretti and Ted Decker. And this one follows two different couples who end up getting stranded at this house in the middle of nowhere. So both of them end up having car trouble on this road. They kind of get turned around and they end up at this place together. It's supposedly a bed and breakfast, but once they get there, they realize this bed and breakfast is not like anything place they've ever been before, and some scary things start to happen. So the owners of this bed and breakfast are not what they seem, and these two couples kind of end up in a fight for their life, and in several different ways. So there is, the classic scary like we're on a back roads wood in like Hicksville, USA, and there's these crazy people that are trying to trap us and murder us. There's that aspect, but then there's also a paranormal aspect as well, which is really cool. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5. It did have a nice twist at the end that I didn't really see coming. Part way throughout it, I guess it could have probably been about a 3.5 that I would have rated it, and I probably just rounded it up to 4. But like part way through the book, I kind of started feeling like, okay, things are getting a little bit redundant, and like, let's have something new happen here. So I will say that about it. But I did like the premise, and it was kind of an idea that was really different, because it kind of took like the classic what you would expect in a book like this and kind of turned it on its side a little bit. The next book is Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson, and this one was one that made it onto my top books of the year so far. They did make a movie out of this one, as you can tell from the cover. But basically this book is about a woman who has been through a horrible incident, and due to this incident she has a really rare form of amnesia, that basically every morning when she wakes up she can't remember her life at all. So she wakes up with memories from about her 20s and backwards, but she's now in her 40s. So there is a 20-year age gap that she doesn't remember. So she wakes up and goes to look in the mirror, and she's like, what is happening? Because she's expecting to be in her 20s and she's actually in her 40s. And she is married to a man that she doesn't remember. Every single morning her husband has to tell her who she is, and that he's her husband, and kind of explain the last 20 years to her to kind of get her to know what's going on. And then every single night she goes to sleep and forgets it all. But what ends up happening in this book is she starts to keep this journal in order to try to improve her memory, and every morning she's reading this journal back, and as she's reading it she's kind of starting to figure out some things about her husband, and she thinks that he might be lying to her about some things. So I kind of did figure out what the twist was going to be in the book, so I will say that part disappointed me, and so I will say that part kind of did disappoint me a little bit, because I was able to figure it out. But I also read a lot of thrillers, and so I feel like I can kind of figure a lot more thrillers out than the average person. So maybe for you, you might not figure out this twist. I'm not sure how obvious it is to the average person who maybe doesn't read quite as many thrillers as I do. But I really enjoyed the writing style, where the author did it in such a way that you would think that it would kind of start to become redundant, because every morning you're waking up with this character and she's going through the same things where she doesn't know what's going on, and you're kind of following her doing that. So you would think that it would start to be like, okay, we get this, we've seen this 47 times already, but it's done in such a way that it just doesn't feel that way. And you really like how you're figuring things out along with her, and you're kind of along for the ride, and you're really cheering this woman on because she's been through so much, and you just want her to succeed, and you want her to be okay, because you realize that she's in a situation that maybe she's not the safest in even now. And yeah, it was a really, really cool idea for a book, and I really enjoyed it. The next book that I finished is Beneath the Stairs by Jennifer Fawcett, and this book basically focuses on two women, and it kind of flashes back into their past, so when they were like young teenagers, and then it also is in modern day when they are in their early 30s. And basically, we see when they were young teenagers, they end up going to this haunted house. There's like the typical haunted house in this little town that they live in their area. And, you know, they go and kind of snoop around there. Oh, and you know what? Actually, as I'm saying this, there's actually a third perspective as well, is people that inhabited the house like 100 years before. So we see their perspective and we see the girl's perspective in the two timelines. So basically, you know, they go as young teenagers, they snoop around this house. There is an incident there that happens, and it kind of stays with these two girls, one more so than the other. And our main character ends up getting called to go back home because her friend ends up trying to commit suicide in this home. So basically this home has been calling to these two girls like for years. They've both become kind of obsessed with it, but the one girl has moved away and is trying to like live her life, and the other one has just kind of allowed herself to be continuing to be obsessed with this house. So the other friend goes back to kind of see what's happened, and the house continues to call to her, and we kind of like go on this adventure with her. I wouldn't really call it an adventure, I guess, but she's drawn back to this house, and there's a reason why. So she kind of has to figure out what has happened to this house, what's going on with this house, why she's so drawn to it, why her friend was so drawn to it, why her friend tried to commit suicide in this basement, like what has happened here. So we're kind of trying to figure that all out, and you know, she wants some closure obviously from this, and we just see what goes on with that. And I liked the writing style. I liked the different perspectives. I liked seeing kind of like us knowing what happened with the history of the house in, you know, the 100 years before these girls ever went in there. So we kind of have a little bit of background. Once again, I did kind of figure out the background situation and what had happened in order to make this house so haunted. But yeah, I really, once again, really cool idea. For a story. I like a classic haunted house spooky story, so that's always something that I'm into. So next is The Woods Are Always Watching by Stephanie Perkins, and I gave this one a 2. It was one of the books that I liked least that I read this year so far. It made it onto my worst list. And this one basically followed two best friends that want to take a trip together. They are graduating next year, or this year, and they want to take this hiking camping trip together. So they end up going on this trip. They're bickering the entire time. I did not like the way that the story was written whatsoever. There is, you know, an evil that happens, and it felt really out of place. It felt really rushed, and I go into this a lot more in my last video, which was the worst books that I read so far this year. I talk about it more on there, so I'm not gonna like go through it all again on here. But basically, I just felt like this book was really rushed and the plot wasn't thought through whatsoever. And I think, like, because I really liked Stephanie Perkins' last thriller that she did, which was There's Someone Inside Your House. I really liked that one. So I don't know if maybe she just was on a really tight deadline and wasn't really able to think this one through quite as much, because it seemed like the evil that kind of happens just happens out of nowhere and doesn't really have any rhyme or reason. It was just like, oh, I need a villain, so I'm just gonna put this here, and it just didn't really make a lot of sense. The next book is The Second Life of Ava Rivers, and this one is by Faith Gardner. This one I gave a 3 out of 5, so I did enjoy it. Once again, I was able to figure out pretty much right off the bat what was going on with it. But basically, this book focuses on two twin girls that one of them was kidnapped when they were 6 years old. So it follows this family. Vera is the one twin and Ava is the other twin. Basically, on Halloween night when they are 6 years old, they kind of end up getting separated from each other, and the one twin goes missing. Now we fast forward, and the twins are now 18 or 19 years old, and the one that is left, Vera, she is going to college soon, and she's just kind of prepared to just leave this life behind her, because her entire family for the last 12 years have just been absolutely destroyed by this incident. They have spent every waking minute, all of their money, like everything that they can possibly do to find Ava. and to no avail, unfortunately. So, but she has kind of felt not seen in her life. Her family has just spent, the entire time focusing on her sister's disappearance, and Vera has kind of just grown up being in the back seat and not really, she's just always been known as Ava's sister who's gone missing, So she's looking forward to kind of branching out on her own and making her own life. And she is preparing to go to college when they get the phone call that Ava has been found. So, which of course, upsets their entire world, turns it on its side. But they kind of start to realize that maybe Ava isn't quite what she seems to be. And there's a lot of questions that go on with what happened to her, where she's been. She is really reluctant to give any information about her captor, and that sort of thing. And they just feel like Ava has come back not being herself, not acting like herself, which, I mean, of course, to some extent would be obvious. She's been kidnapped for 12 years. But yeah, there's some questions there about her, and we get to kind of figure out what's happened. Like I said, I ended up figuring it out very, very early on. I kind of had the idea pop into my head, and it ended up being correct. But once again, I don't know if that's something that everybody will catch on to or not. Next is The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig, and I listened to this one on audiobook and I gave it a 4 out of 5. This one kind of in some ways reminded me of Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky, which you guys know I absolutely loved. And it's kind of more really the feeling of the writing, more so than the plot of the book, I guess, although I guess kind of. So basically we have a family, a mother, a father, and a teenage boy who end up moving into the father's old home. So basically the father grew up with an extremely abusive father, who has since passed away, and they are moving into his family home. So, he's kind of, we're following all 3 different perspectives. We're following the father's perspective, the mother's perspective, and the son's perspective. And he's the father is kind of trying to come to terms with living in this house where so much negative things has happened to him in his past, and kind of trying to just deal with his father's passing, knowing that there was no relationship there towards the end, and just kind of dealing with all of that. And then some weird things start to happen. So we have a paranormal aspect of some weird things happening in the house. And like, is the house haunted? Is the grandfather haunting the house? And the grandfather's like evil, because he was evil in real life. We have that sort of situation. And then we also have like a parallel universe, crossing over timelines sort of situation, which you guys know that I really like that sort of thing. And so in those ways, like, it does remind me of Imaginary Friend, and also just kind of how their writing style is similar in my opinion. So I did really like this one. I liked the 3 perspectives on it, and how they're all relating to each other, and how they're all relating to another character in the book that kind of is like pulling some strings, and how they're each of these main characters is relating to that character. It's so hard trying to like say things without saying things and spoiling it. But check this one out if you like. If you've read Imaginary Friend and you like that one, you'll probably like this one. Next is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. And this one is it's a historical fiction. It takes place, I think, in the early 1900s or late 1800s, maybe, around there. And basically it follows a main character who is a teenage girl growing up in like colonial times, where they're very strict and very like, this would be in the time of burning witches sort of thing. So very scary. They're all very, very religious in this small town that she lives in. So there is a prophet in their town that they all kind of go to for guidance, and he kind of controls everything. Of course, this is, back in days when women did not have a lot of rights. He has multiple wives, of course, and he's always taking new wives. But there kind of starts to be some evil that kind of starts to happen. And basically our main character was born to a mother who had her out of wedlock. There is kind of like, there's their town, and then there's a woods around it. And they are instructed to never ever go into the woods. That is where the witches live. That is where evil lives. And our main character's mother lived in the woods for a year when she was pregnant with our main character. And so the main and her mother ended up dying while in labor with her. So, but she is kind of had this albatross around her neck of who her mother was. And she's kind of been judged on that fact, that her mother was a witch, and that her mother was evil, sort of thing. And so she is kind of looked down upon in this town. Now, through kind of some mishap, our main character, whose name is Emmanuel, by the way, I don't know why I keep saying our main character, Emmanuel she kind of ends up in these woods, and she stumbles upon, I'll just say this, she stumbles upon a journal from her mother. And as she reads this journal, she kind of starts to question some things herself, and she starts to question some things about the church. And then she starts to realize that there's more going on here than meets the eye, and there's like evil forces. She meets an unlikely ally that helps her out. And yeah, it was just really, really good. I love anything to do with witches. I find it so spooky, and I don't know why, but I love me a good witch story. I just love that. And I love the historical fiction. I love the writing style. I really enjoyed the plot of the book. Like I said, I really don't want to give too much away. This is one of those books that's hard to talk about without giving a lot away. But basically, this one was really, really well done. I love the fact that the author was able to write it from the 1800s with it reading that way. Like a lot of times, I've said this in the past, a lot of times people will start off really strong in the era that they're trying to write in, and it kind of just like fades over throughout the book until all of a sudden you're reading it and it just reads like it would, in today's time. So you have to really be able to do that well, in my opinion, and our author definitely did that well in this book. And I liked the mystery. I liked the different aspects. I liked the woods part. I liked the haunted woods part, and I really, really like this main character. This book ultimately is about women's freedom, women's liberation, and coming into your own and commanding some respect at a time when women did not earn or get a lot of respect. So yeah, a lot of different really good points to this book. So the second to last book we're going to talk about is Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. And this one I gave a 3 out of 5 to. I was really looking forward to this one, but it just kind of went off on a tangent, I feel. And it just kind of went, it went a little wonky for me. I did like it, but it went a little wonky. So basically we follow these employees of this store. It's basically IKEA. It's stated in the beginning of the book that like this is not IKEA, and like any reference is just coincidental or whatever, but it's IKEA. Okay? so it's based in an IKEA. And we have the main characters are people that work at this IKEA, and some strange things are starting to go on. And some of the staff think that the store is haunted, and some of the staff, mainly the manager, just thinks that there's like a prankster that's kind of hiding out after hours and messing around with the store, because when they get into the store in the morning, things are messed up and broken and whatnot. And so they decide to stay overnight in this store and catch whoever is doing this. So while they're in the store, some crazy things start to happen. We have the aspect of somebody staying over in the store. We have like that, but then we also have a horror aspect to it as well. So there's kind of two things that are going on in this store that is causing what's happening. So we're following this. I will say it does go off the rails a little bit. At some point it's kind of like, okay, really, it gets a little bit fantastical. I love that I'm saying it gets a little bit fantastical as I'm talking about like a haunted IKEA, but I digress. It does, like, it just gets a little bit like too excessive even for me, but I did overall enjoy it. I think this is one of those books that, once again, really good idea for a story. Maybe execution wasn't quite 100% there and could have been done a little bit differently, but overall I gave it a 3. And the last book that I finished this month was The Shadows by Alex North. And this one follows kind of 2 different timelines as well. So it follows our main character in present day, and also back when he was a child, like 12 years old, I think, around there. And basically when he was 12, he kind of was in this crowd that, kind of part of the Losers Club. but his friends ended up committing a horrible, horrific murder that has kind of become infamous. And it's kind of one of those murders that, you know, has taken on a life of its own, and people have always talked about it. And there's all these different theories on what happened and whatnot, because the main perpetrator disappeared after this murder happened. And kind of what we find out in the book is, it's kind of like, almost reminds me of like the Shadow Man legend. So we've got that going on, and then plus a murder going on. But basically, you know, all these online sleuths are trying to figure out where the murderer went, what happened to him, like if he disappeared, is there a paranormal aspect to this? This happened at a time when there was a lot of like devil worshipping and stuff like that. It happened in the 80s, right? So there's always that sort of aspect to it as well. And basically our main character ends up getting called home. This is years later, and he's kind of brought back to a situation where he has to kind of face his old demons, so to speak. He's kind of like gone away and tried to forget about all of this, but he has now come home because his mother is dying, and he is kind of forced to deal with this and figure out what has happened. So it was really, really good. Like I said, really good premise for a book, and it reminded me a lot of Slender Man, which is kind of cool, to have like kind of a murder mystery based on that, which is really, really neat. But yeah, I gave this one a 4. So those are all the 11 books that I read this month. It was a lot. I can see that my battery is about to die in my camera, so I'm going to make my sign off quick. But let me know in the comments down below if you guys read any of these books and what your thoughts on them were. And I hope you're having an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!